Well, hi there. Welcome, quilty friends, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to my sewing room, where today we will be sewing another hometown block, and this is block number 13. And this is what the 10-inch block number 13 looks like. And these are the 5-inch blocks. And I'm just going to set that one right here so we have one to look at, and I'll show you these to you one by one, so you can see the different color combinations of hometown that I used. So last week when we did block 12, I was showing you my little basket where I have all these pieces cut, pre-cut, and I told you that I wanted to use some of the 3.5-inch strips, and so this is what we're doing, because this consists of 1.5-inch squares, and then we've got 3.5-inch strips on the outside. And you just need 2 different colors for this one, and then 1 background. And so I just tried doing the different color combinations like I've, talked to you about. I try to do, like this red is what I consider a warm color, and so I will pick a cool tone. Most of the time, there's always an exception to that, but most of the time that's kind of my go-to. So if I'm doing warm colors on the outside, then I'll try to pick like a cool color to go on the inside, and cool colors to me are blues and greens and grays, and I just think that allows for a lot of contrast. So see, here's a warm color now on the outside too as well. Yellows and reds I consider warm, and then I've got blues on the middle. And then browns is either a neutral, but it is very warm as well. So anyway, so I know a lot of you have commented that you like when I talk about how I choose my prints and, doing scrappy blocks. And so that's kind of a rule that I do, is kind of mix up warm and cool tones together. All right, let me set those there for a bit. And so these are the blocks that I have 16 of each of the 13 blocks done so far. These are the stacks I've got here. And I left these out here on my board that I showed you last time, just kind of a variety of how they're looking together, all the different shapes. And so this pinwheel right here, see how we've used the 3.5-inch with the pinwheel in the center. This one's got the little shoe fly in the center. And so I liked that so that we could have another block in the quilt, like that. Let me pull this other board in. It's kind of far out of my reach. Okay. So I'm just going to hold these right here. Maybe Cass can get a shot of those so you can kind of see how they're looking together close up. And I'm really, really loving the different variety that I have in these. And it's really been fun to sew, sew these like this. Okay, so I've got this ready to go. So for each block, we need 5 1.5-inch squares, and this is for the 5-inch. Of course, I've got the 10-inch recipe, cutting recipe in the description of the video. And we need 5 of those, and then we need 4 of the 1.5 by 3.5-inch, and then we need 12 1.5-inch squares for the background. And that's all we need for this. Let me pull my machine in, and I've got my Seam So Easy guide here taped to my featherweight. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take 3 of these 1.5-inch squares, and I'm going to sew a background to it using the 1/4-inch seam allowance right here. I'm going to grab my little go-to piecing glasses, which are my red ones most of the time. Okay. And then I think I'll just use a scrap of fabric in between. I'm getting closer on being ready to show you my bonus quilt. So I'll show you that one of these times. And then I'm going to open this one, and I'm going to grab another, so I've got 2 of these remaining. I'm going to add onto this end. That one, I'm going to do the same thing. Add the print on the other end. And I'm forming this 9 patch to later turn into a shoe fly. So for this one, I want to grab a background and put on the other side. So this one, I want just the print in the center. Okay, another strip of fabric in between. And then I'll just cut these apart and bring them over here to the ironing board. And I'm just going to press these open. So I'm going to open them up first with my finger, and then I'm going to get my seam roller and roll them just to make sure they're from top to bottom, front to back, whatever you want to say, rolled out all the way so there's no pleats in there, so that I can just go ahead and put my iron right on top. And I have a nice hot iron, and again, with my vintage irons, I never turn it all the way up to high. I usually use medium or maybe a little bit warmer, but in a previous video when I talk about my vintage irons, I tell all about that, where I find them, how I know which ones to buy and which ones to stay away from. Okay, so I'm going to let that cool down for just a minute, and while that's cooling, I'm going to take 2 of the rectangles and I'm going to add a background square onto each end, and that's forming this top row and the bottom row. And then I'm just going to go ahead and cut that one off the end and join that. Same thing for this one. So now it's ready to press these, and this little center block is nice and cool and ready to go. So I'll set that there, and I'm going to do the same thing for this. I'm going to open up these seams. Y'all know the drill by now, but that's how I do it. So I do it like this every time, and then I'm going to press. I'm going to grab a couple more clappers that I haven't recently used so that they're nice and cool, and I'm just going to use 2 clappers for that. And then over here I need to form that into a 9 patch, and so I'm just going to sew this together, and then those segments that I just sewn should be cool by then. I'm going to either pin or not pin. Again, if I pin, I'm going to grab my little double pins so that I'm pinning, just sticking a little pin in on both sides. You can either sew over it slowly or you can take it out right before. Sometimes I'm in the mood to pin, sometimes I'm not. Most of the time I'm not. When I do pin, it's when I have seams, you know, that need to match up exactly, like in the center. That may look like when I go to just use my fingers that it might be a little bit off if I just put it under the machine. So I'll just go ahead and pin, but this one looks really good. So I'm gonna now look at the next one. That looks nice too. Okay. So then I'm going to come over here, open it up, make sure all those corners are good. And when I say the corners, this is where I'm talking about, those seams. And I'm going to set this seam, which I forgot to do in the other one. That's what I usually do, is set the seams. Sometimes, you know, when I'm filming, I forget a step here and there, but I try to be very detailed for you. Okay, so those are cool. And then I'm going to open that up, and because I've got now intersections here, I'm going to for sure roll this, but really roll over those intersections and make sure those are squished down as far as they can go down. And now I'm going to set that iron on there. Now that I've got several seam allowances and kind of double layers, I make sure I keep that iron on there for a minute. I'm going to put that there, and then at this point, this is when I grab my little design board, whatever size I'm working with, whatever size block works. This is my bitty board. This is a 7-inch square. Works perfectly for these little 5-inch blocks. So I'm just going to lay that out in preparation for my next step. I'm going to put those there because what we're going to be doing next is, see, I just formed a 9-patch first, and now I'm going to do the easy corner triangles right here to, you know, form that shoe fly block. So I'm just letting that cool for just a minute. And then, oh, I forgot to tell you that we will be using, let's turn this to this side so we can see it. We'll be using the 3.5-inch Trim-It, and then of course the 5.5-inch Trim-It ruler at the end. But this is the point where I like to just check it with the ruler and make sure that if it's too big, I want to trim it down. If it's too small, I want to be aware of that so that I can, you know, each individual block is different, so I want to be able to know if there's any problems on a certain block so that I can adjust that or fix that if I need to. That one looks like a little smidgen off of that one. And the same off of that. I usually just move my mat instead of like this, so that I can keep my ruler where it is. That's why I like these little small mats. And then you can see that I just took just a little bit off. So it might, I enjoy doing that because I just like to be as accurate as I can between each step. But that wasn't enough that it would really, really hugely make a difference. But remember, I think it makes a difference because remember, we're adding easy corner triangles onto this. And if you're off a little bit in the beginning, I like to just nip that in the bud. You know what I mean? So before I start building upon it and you know, making it so that it doesn't work. So at this point, all I'm doing is just lining those up. And now I'm going to start right in the corner. Now you can mark from corner to corner. You can take a pencil, mechanical pencil. You can take a ruler. These are my new little rulers. And these are a 1/2 inch wide, and that's a 1/4 inch line in the middle. So you could, you know, use those when you're making 2 half square triangles, or just use it as a marking ruler. But I don't need to mark these small squares because I have my Seam So Easy guide, and I just follow this center line. So whichever method you like to use, you know, that works too. And then I'm just going to use a scrap of fabric in between so that I can just add these easy corner triangles on to the ends. Okay. I was checking my math because I'm noticing I think I got 2 more of these than I needed. I only needed 12 and I had brought in 14 because I'm like, why do I have... It's always alarming when you have extra fabric left over, right? It's like fixing something and you have extra parts left over. That's never a good thing. So I didn't have them left over. I had just counted wrong in the first place. that's why I like to work with 2 scraps of fabric, so I have something in the beginning and the end. And for my little starters and stoppers. Okay, now at this point, I'm going to look at this and see if, I feel like I got off on that one. So see, I can see that the threads are from corner to corner there, corner to corner there, but it's off of that corner right there. I kind of let it slip a little bit. So I'm just going to re-sew that, and I don't need to use the seam ripper on that, because we're just going to press these seams towards the easy corner triangle. We're not going to press these seams open, and so I don't need to worry about, you know, unpicking that second seam, because we're just going to end up pressing it like that. Okay, so now I'm going to bring that over, set those threads, grab my scissors, and just trim an approximate 1/4 inch seam, or a little bit bigger. I don't really like to trim a little bit smaller, because I feel like if I trim my seams under 1/4 inch, that they kind of stick up and your block doesn't lie as flat. So you could use a rotary cutter if you want, but I just kind of eyeball it. I've sewn long enough that I pretty much know what a 1/4 inch seam looks like, and because it doesn't have to be exact when you're trimming, I don't worry about that too much. So as you can see that I'm pressing from the inside out, so that I'm not putting any pleats in that. And then I'll just take these clappers and put on top of there, and just keep a little bit of weight on top of there. And I'm going to let that cool for just a minute, and I'm going to show you this block in the back of it. And so when we're pressing these seam allowances, you can see that I pressed everything open, just like I showed you in the 9 patch, but I pressed open there. And the reason, I did not press open there, sorry. I pressed towards the easy corner triangle. And the reason I did that is sometimes I just take, well, every time I take a block, for instance, and say, okay, does this completely need to be pressed open, or is it going to be easier or better or just as accurate to press some of it, you know, towards one side? And I feel like because this doesn't run into any seams, so because this is just a straight piece of fabric, that it's okay to press those open. And because I squared it up and trimmed it up, I know that it's the correct size, it's accurate, and I'm not worried about that. And so that's, you know, that's what I'm doing with that. And then also I use the same rule by pressing to the outside of these little borders that go on the block as well. I didn't feel that it was necessary to press them open against these pointed seams. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Now, see, we're ready to go there. I can, again, because I've added these easy corner triangles, you know, maybe one corner was a little bit larger, you know, maybe it was off a little bit, but no, you can see that I don't have anything hanging out, and they go right up against the edges, so that's good. And so now I'm just going to sew this side to here using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'll just go ahead and run it through and sew both sides at the same time. And I mean the same time before pressing. I mean, obviously I can only do one seam at a time, but you know, I'm tripping over my words today for some reason, but I hope you guys know what I'm talking about. Okay, so again, you can pin this. If you're a pinner, that's great. But if you have followed me long enough and seen my videos, you know that I only pin, you know, when they're larger blocks or when it's borders or, you know, things like that, certain seams when it's necessary. Okay, so that's what that looks like, and I usually like to open it and make sure I haven't run over any points or there's a problem. That one goes right to the point. That's a little bit extra left over, but I can bring that. I know that that's a 1/4 inch seam because I looked at it, and so I think that's okay. I'd rather have it under the point a little bit, because if the block ends up being just a little bit too big right there, a smidgen, then, you know, I just trim it off using my trim it ruler and trim it off. I need to roll those. I'm going to press this one from the front because it's open and I feel like I can just get a better press that way. And I don't really need to let this, you know, sit for that long because I'm just pressing these towards one side. This side is really warm now because that's absorbed the heat, and so sometimes when I'm just babysitting one block, then I'll just kind of use this as an iron, try to get that heat out of there and push down. And if, you know, if I was using my actual iron, it would just keep making it hotter and hotter, but this is pulling the heat out of it, but yet because I'm pushing down, it's smashing it flatter. So I'll see what that result is, so I like that. And then I'm just going to come over here, and now for sure I want these seams to line up right here, and so what I'm going to do is just start on the corner where I need to start. And then before I get here, I'm just going to check that and make sure they line up. And if I'm worried about it, again, I'll take my little double pins, or you can do 2 pins, and I just barely poke them in, one on each side of that seam allowance, so there's no slipping. And then slowly, I don't like to do that part fast just because I want to make sure that I'm not going to break my needle or something going over the pin. But then I'll take that out, continue sewing. And when I get to this part right here, I'll just go ahead and do the same thing. Didn't quite get that on one side. Can you see that one on each side? I'm going to slow down when I get to the pin. As soon as I've got over that seam, then I can go ahead and pull it out. I'm just going to stick it there in case I need it for the other side. And then just make sure these are at the corner where needed. And I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So I'm really worried more about, or I don't know if I want to say worried, but I'm aware of how the center of the block is matching up. And then I'll worry about any outside edges. If they're a little teeny bit larger, then I can trim them off after if needed. And so I just want to make sure that the seams are lining up and what the center of the block looks like. Now, if your block ends up a little bit too small, I did talk about that a couple of videos back, that you can go back and look at that if you need help on that. So now I'm going to bring this over here. I'm going to open it up and just make sure. See, that looks great. That looks good there. That one's hanging over just a touch, but it's just right there. So you can see that that is hanging over just a little teeny bit. And you know, this 1.5 inch square could have been cut just a smidgen too big or something like that, you know, but that's easily fixed at the very end. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to set my seams, and then I'm going to go ahead and press this open. I was almost preparing to press that. Okay, I said press the seams open. I'm going to press this block open towards the outside here, not the seams. And grab a couple clappers that I haven't used. And then because this is the final press of this block, I really like to stack these up here and get some weight on that. Or in other words, what I call quilty physics. I'm a believer in it. I'm going to let that sit there for just a minute, but I'm going to answer a question and have a little bit of show and tell here about this ironing board cover. When I recovered this, I don't know, 2 or 3 videos back, then I've had several comments and questions about how they love this fabric and what kind of fabric is it and where did I get it. This is one of my decorator weight fabrics, and so I brought in some of them to show you. Okay, so I use these for a lot of things, you know, covering chairs, covering benches, making pillows, making project bags, things like that. They're 100% cotton. I'm going to put them on the side here so you can see the prints, and maybe I'll open up in a minute. But they're 100% cotton, but it's like a lightweight canvas is the best way that I can describe it, but I love to use them for covering ironing boards and for lots of projects in the sewing room. And so I'm just going to show you one by one. This is a bundle. These are 1 yard cuts that I have. So that's what this one looks like. And I've got my vintage ladies. You can see my curtains that I have here. And then this one is like vintage button cards. Let me unfold that just a little bit so you can see that. And that's really fun. And these are my first 6 decorator weights that I did. And I have a video showing how I make my ironing boards and how I cover them. And of course I had to have the classic red gingham. This was from my very first fabric collection, this red gingham that I did with So Cherry. And let's take this one off. And then this was my next 6. And so these 12 are not the only decorator weight prints I have. I usually do at least one in each collection ever since then. And they're really, really fun to work with. And I use them all the time in my sewing room. So this one you've seen before because this is what I had on my last ironing board there, was the sewing machines. This one is the tomato one right here that you've got, the tomato pin cushion. And then I did my vintage ladies as per request again with an aqua background, so that they wanted aqua and pink. And then here's all the little quilting, sewing, stitching words on that one. And then this is a piece that I did with my stitch collection, and I loved it so much I wanted this in a decorator weight with red, and I use that quite a bit. And then I've got this frosting pink one with the scattered pins. And so I use these a lot in ironing boards, in my big ironing boards, and I always link to the video on showing you, but you may want to, if you want help with this or want to know how I do it. But I make all different sizes. Like this size, you can see that I cut this. I got a pin stuck in that one. And so I made 6 of these. Let me move this out of the way. Can you see those stacked right there, sis? Mm-hmm. So here's the other 5 of my first 6, when I did my first 6. And this is a nice size that I do. I talk about this in my video where I take these on retreats with me. Sometimes I don't even have room to plug an iron in. And so I will take these 2 and have it by my sewing machine. And then I can just go ahead and press my seams that way. Or I can use 2 of them together and put my iron on one and then just have another one to just kind of press right there by my machine. This is a nice size that I take on retreats or sew day with my friends with me, so I can keep my iron right here and just my little patchwork right here. And these are just the 2 sizes that I do. I do a lot of different sizes, and I talk about that more in my video. But while that block was cooling down, I wanted to bring these fabrics in and talk to you about that. And also the decorator weight is like 58 to 60 inches wide. It's wider than, you know, your normal 44, 45 quilting cotton. And so that makes it convenient. They make really fun curtains, pillowcases, and all that kind of things. Okay, let's look at that finished block right here. I think it looks pretty good. And of course, it's not going to lie exactly flat because our seams are not pressed open. It just is not possible. That's just the physics of it because I've got all of these layers right here. But that's okay, you know what? Because we're going to make sure it's accurate, and that's the most important thing. When you quilt it into your quilt, you know, it's going to obviously lie flat during the quilting, so I'm not too worried about that. The reason I like my blocks to lie flat when I'm pressing seams open for small blocks especially is because that's what keeps them accurate as you're sewing. And so I'm just going to lay this on here, and you know, already I can see that one that I told you hung over just a little bit. It's right on this side right here. So we'll get that next. Let me grab my little cutter. I've got just a little bit hanging over right here. And then there's that one right there and a little teeny bit. I don't know if you can really see that but on the angle of the camera, but you can see how much I've trimmed away there on the sides. And then I'm just going to turn it and do these sides. There's a little teeny bit of that blue right there sticking out. And then on this side, it's just right in the middle. Like that. Okay, so now I've got an exact 5.5 inch block. Let me put it here so that we can see it. I love this little shoe fly block. It's so fun. And you know, again, I love my method of doing the easy corner triangles after forming it into a 9 patch and then doing the easy corner triangles, because it's so much easier to do that than it would be. I mean, you can make these little 1.5 inch unfinished half square triangles. You could do that, but it's very bulky already when you're starting to add those. This makes it nice and smooth because you've pressed those seams open, and then you just add those in the corners. And I think the sewing is faster, it's more accurate, and it's much easier cutting and everything like that. And so that's why I do that method when I can, adding those in the corners. All right, so I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. Thank you so much for all of your kind comments and for joining me in my sewing room today. I really love sewing with you, and I will be back here next week for block 14 in this Hometown Blocks 5 inch and 10 inch series, and that'll be my last one on this series. And so we'll talk about the quilt, and you know, we'll just go over the measurements again, which I've already given you, but we'll talk about that, the runner and the quilt. And so I'll talk to you next week. I'll chat with you then.